Hey, what's up, everybody? Good. Welcome to another episode of the Victorious Ones podcast. Podcast, the place where gaming meets comics, meets sports, meets movies, as well as inspiration. Of course, I am your host, King Von Jr. King Von Jr. Excuse me. You can follow me on social media on Twitter/X at 301 King Von Jr. You can follow the show's Twitter page or X page at Victory Pod One. I'm also on Instagram at Mr. King Von Jr. You can follow the show's Instagram page at Victorious Ones Podcast. I'm also the social media producer for Perfect Plex Talk Radio, of course, on Mondays at 6 p.m., hosted by a friend of the program, Mike Knox. And so, so of course, with that being said, I don't know why it's not recording for some reason on Twitter right now. But let me see. See if I can. Yeah, sorry about that. But yeah, see what I can do with this. Add this as a destination now. Yeah, so all right, so but yeah, it's saying temporary issue. Said wait a moment, and try. But anyway, but yeah, like seeing, of course, regardless of that, like I said, with that being said, of course, as far as this week's episode, it was quite a weekend recently, as this past Saturday, of course, here in the DC area, I was at BlerDCon, which is, Blerd is in, Black Nerd Convention, whatever. So it's, the Black version of the Black Comic Con, really, that's what it is. And it takes place every year at the Hyatt Regency Hotel in Crystal City, and of course, I'm out in Virginia, and it's always an event. It's more of a cookout, type of atmosphere, or whatever. It's constantly packed. It's constantly sells out. It's amazing. Definitely more guests than before. They had Redman was there, Godfrey, who else? Zazzy Beats. You name it. All kind of different people. And so I could tell the clientele is definitely growing, and and so it's the second. I want to say it was the second year in a row that that's taken place in March, and it's been very successful. And there was so many different cosplayers. You name it. You know what I mean? Just such a variety. And as a matter of fact, this upcoming, excuse me. Matter of fact, this upcoming weekend, there's going to be another convention in DC. It's called Awesome Con, and so that's the DC version of what San Diego Comic Con, New York Comic Con are. So and of course, I'm going to cosplay, do my own version of Wolverine, and I can't wait. Matter of fact, little spoiler alert. I'm not too, see, I got these on right here. Got these bad boys right here. A little sneak preview of what's going to take place on Saturday. So I'm very excited about that. But like I see, this past week, like I said, it was BlerDCon, and so it was, was the theme of it was Geeknik, which is the geek version of Freaknik, and it definitely delivered on that moniker this year, and quite a few ways, if you will. Let's just say let's just say people like to use cosplay sometimes, let the freak side show, and it certainly did this past weekend, but it wasn't nothing super outrageous or whatever, but they did have a few like 90s themed cosplay and outfits here and there, and the creativity, how strategic they are. Like the thing is, when it comes to cosplay, there's certain like little context clues, like little riddles that that you can see in somebody's just little these little references here and there. If you're not careful, you may miss out on it. And like I said, the creativity, like I see, the different clues and rather Easter eggs, right? That's what it is. Like certain costumes almost have like Easter eggs in them or something, whatever the case is. And I've learned to look out for some of that stuff. There's fact, it was a variety of stuff. Recently, I even saw somebody dressed up as Marlon Wayans character in Don't Be a Menace. You know what I mean? Who else? I've seen, um, of course, this is a regular thing. I've seen, but somebody dressed up as the Prowler version of Miles Morales from Spider Verse. Who else? Like I said, I've seen two different cyborg cosplayers. I took a picture of one from the Teen Titans cartoon, and there was a much taller guy that was dressed up like cyborg from the Injustice game. You know what I mean? I've seen Wonder Woman cosplayers look amazing. Jack Skellington from Nightmare Before Christmas. What else? Those even guy dressed up like Blastoise, and the way he did it, of course he had the of course he had the turtle shell. Of course he had the turtle shell on his back, and he had and the thing is the way he had it done, it was almost like a suit. He had the blue dress shirt, the blue dress pants, white shoes, and he had this yellow vest like that kind of vest that you wear in a three-piece suit. I was like, he even had the ears on it too. I said, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. There were even dudes dressed up like the Warriors. I'm not talking about Golden State. I'm talking about the movie Warriors. I was like, oh, I definitely had to take a picture of that. At Ghostbusters, Men in Black. Shout out to a friend of mine, Brandon, who was dressed up as John Cena. I thought that was pretty cool. What else? I mean, they've had a Batman versus Bane standoff. Lil Kim. There was even a cosplayer dressed up as Lil Kim. Shout out to Luxury Leah on Instagram. Like I said, she did great with the Lil Kim cosplay. And I even got to see there was some Sailor Moon cosplayers. And a shout out to Stormy P on Instagram. Like I said, got a chance to meet her, and like I said, and also she also dressed up, did a Star Wars cosplay too. I missed out on that lightsaber thing. But yeah, like I said, as far as that, they've had so somebody dressed up like Luigi mixed with LL Cool J or something, or beatbox. He had the green Kango, all kind of stuff. I even saw somebody dressed up like a Smurf. I was like, oh shoot, yeah, you know what I mean. I was like, and he was very easy to recognize. I've seen Captain America cosplayers. Who hasn't seen them? Your Wolverines, you name it. Like just anybody who is anybody. I've seen Power Ranger, Mandalorian cosplayers. You know what I mean? Like whoever it is, more than likely, 9 times out of 10, 10 times out of 10, you name it, I have seen it. The Pokemon cosplayers, Powerline, all kind of stuff. You know what I mean? It like I said, I'm still trying, get the, like I said, get the, excuse me, let me slow down. Like I said, I'm still trying to get the, the Twitter, excuse me, I'm trying to get the Twitter or X stream. I'm trying to get that up right now, but for some reason it's not, not picking up, not loading, whatever the case is. It's live on Facebook, live on YouTube, youtube.com/@Von Resper Jr. You know what I mean? Like I said, as right now, X is experiencing little technical difficulties at the moment, but either way, regardless, the show must still go on. I also saw, some Mario cosplayers, for Mario photo shoot, Powerline, you know what I mean? Like, and there was even a guy, shout out to my man, Iceman Hickey on Instagram. He did a cosplay where we did a Samurai Link. You know what I mean? I said, oh, this is very much out the box, giving me ideas. Some Dr. Doom cosplayers, of course, right on point. Shout out to them. And there was even another Dr. Doom cosplayer. So it was him and his girlfriend, where it was Dr. Doom and Storm. So he was dressed up as Doom, and his girlfriend was dressed up as Storm. So I have got a picture of that. So in Bison cosplayer, I said, yeah, it's just like you name it, they've done it. Team Rocket cosplayers. And like I said, anybody who's anybody. I mean, it's just so many so many to name right off the top of my head. I wouldn't even have enough time. But just the like I said, just the atmosphere, just the environment, just the creativity of it all. Um, it's always an experience. And so my main two conventions that I like to go to, that I always like to get off my list, are BlerDCon and AwesomeCon. And now I'm starting to think about adding Baltimore Comic Con as well after what I saw last year. You know what I mean? So yeah, like I said, cosplay, is always fun. Is always something, we could, it's like a break from reality, because reality is stranger than fiction at this point. So yeah, with that being said, and speaking of uh, reality being stranger than fiction, um, you know, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm saying this. We shouldn't really make too big of a deal about it, considering considering the circumstance around it. But last night, out of nowhere, like an RKO out of nowhere. Um, at first, I wasn't going to acknowledge it, but you know what? Um, I'm like, whatever. It's you can't escape it. Uh, Miami Heat's All-Star Bam Adebayo had 83 points, second place all time in single game scoring, behind Wilt Chamberlain's 100. So he moved past Kobe for second all time. So it's Wilt with 100, Bam with 83, and Kobe with 81. Right. So I mean, he did it, but I think the thing for me, I know I jokingly said good morning to everyone except for Bam, whatever. Like, all that aside, the main thing, I can't even, I'm clarifying it now for people that may take exception. But the thing is, all jokes aside, it's really not so much of a Bam Adebayo thing as it is, more so an indictment on the Wizards. You know what I mean? Because they're one of the, if not the sorriest team in the league. Not to shade Bam's accomplishment, but look at what it is. Even my dad, uh, wasn't really tripping off. He was like, look, the Wizards are no better than a high school team. You know what I mean? And so it's just like whatever. And the way they play, they just, clearly they were just mailing in. They didn't care. They just showed up, just to show up, and and played no defense. Didn't care at all whatsoever. Spoelstra, of course, never took Bam. Didn't take Bam out the game. Just let him keep going and going and going. And so, and not only that, of course, 43 free throws or whatever. And so it's just like, I think more so with me is, of course, he's an all-star, but at the same time, he's one of the most non-scoring, guys, really in NBA history, compared to, the other top scorers for single game points. Like when you look at Wilt, you look at Kobe, what I mean? Like, just um, offensive excellence and proficiency, you name it. You know what I mean? Those guys, along with Jordan, Kareem, though they represent, they're pretty much the benchmarks. Excuse me. Those guys, represent, the benchmarks for, for offense, right? For scoring. And so this was just super random. The reason why I say that is because going to this game, Bam was only averaging like 18 points a game. Let's just call it what it is. It's not like he's in the MVP running, right? When Wilt scored his 100, um, he finished the season second in MVP voting, only to Bill Russell. You know what I mean? And we all know the reason why is because the Celtics were a far superior team, right? And that had to be the deepest MVP race in NBA history, because you had, because you had Bill Russell, because he's Bill Russell, what I mean? He was a reigning MVP already. He's, part of a dynasty, You know, and that was on the verge of they were in the middle of a historic run. You know, a run towards history. So you know, he was the lead cause for that, right? So of course, with that alone, it would be enough merit for him to win the MVP, even though Wilt had the greatest season of his career, season of his life, 50 and 25 that season. He was second. Oscar Robertson, had the triple double that season. You know what I mean? So he was third. And of course, you also had, Elgin Baylor, who was averaging like 38 and 19 while only playing like 48 games because he was on, doing military service or whatever. So, he was, because he was doing military service at the time. And of course, you had Jerry West, who was Jerry West, right? So, those are the top five, players, within, within like the MVP race. And so, yeah, like I said, Wilt, he was putting in that case. Kobe averaged like 35.4 points, 35.4 points per game or whatever that season. And so, of course, that was the same season he had the 81 points. And even before that game, well, like 2 months before that, it was that game against the Mavericks, where he had 62 points in 3 quarters. With throughout 3 quarters, he was outscoring, the Mavericks themselves, collectively. You know what I mean? So, yeah, so with that being said, those guys had MVP level seasons. So this, so this goes to the point that I'm making is that, Bam was before this. It's not like he was, having runs like that leading into this. So that's what I'm saying. It was just totally random, and it goes to show also, another thing is that for those online who want to question whether whether MJ could make it in today's game, and whether or not he could still put up numbers in today's game. Last night for the proof, yeah, absolutely. You put Jordan in his prime at the top of his game, drop him in today's NBA. That dude's averaging 55 a game. Last night just proved that, and I think more so it's it is got people looking at the NBA and even super completely different now. It's really not, like I said, there's no shade on Bam, but at the same time, just looking at the landscape of the game, it's you can't, it's almost like pretty much an indictment, for people that want to say, such legend couldn't survive in today's game. That right there absolutely proved that they could. It shows that if somebody like Bam, who is not the caliber of your Shaqs, Olajuwon, and guys like that, certainly not Jordan, someone who's not that caliber, goes off and has a game like that, then those legend ABC that you think of, could do something like that in today's game themselves. And not only that, not to sound like the old head and nothing like that, but like, come on, let's just call it what it is. And of course, not only that, but of course, you have people that want to talk about, cutting the season short, even as little as 10 games, but it's just like, you look at how many injuries these players have. It's almost like a plague or something, or epidemic of, how many injuries, these guys pile up, and, now all of a sudden, I know all of a sudden you want to curtail, the season for the, curtail the number of games just for the sake of, preserving these guys, when so many people say that, there's some more evolved and physical league, but, if that's the case, why is it that, that so many people are, calling for the season to be shortened, just to preserve these players. Meanwhile, someone like Jordan consistently played 82 games, like it was nothing, you know what I mean? And so it's just like, you have people that just want to, move the goalposts and try to, twist history around, in for their own narrative, all kinds of stuff like that. So it was like, nah, nah, you know what I mean? So just a state of the way the game is now. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like whatever. I mean, you can have it at this point. But of course, side note, I still, of course, still, watch a lot of, Wemby's games. What I mean, my dad and I are big fans of Wemby. Huge supporters of his, and definitely want to see him go to infinity and beyond. And really, maximize his potential, his upside. You name it, all those things, right? So so that's where our main focus was anyway. But of course, I digress though. And it is still, man. So yeah. Except for some reason, like I said, for some reason, Twitter X is still, trying to play in my face, in regards to the streaming. But like so, other than that, regardless, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I'm concerned, the show, still goes on. So when it comes to the weekend wrestling, not too much other than of course Cody winning the WWE Championship and completely changing the complexion of WrestleMania, the landscape of the WrestleMania main event. And he had just come off getting pinned by Randy Orton in the Elimination Chamber. And then of course you go from losing, losing a spot at Mania in the Chamber to to go on another route and win the title, win the title and find a way to get into, get into that main event spot, right? And of course I also said on like among many other people that Cody might as well put on his mustache and and said, what, that doesn't work for me, brother. I guess he looked at the potential of facing Jacob Fatu, and it was like, what, that doesn't work for me, brother. And so so of course he ends up using his backstage card or whatever, and finds a way to to get into the main event. You know what I mean? And and of course so much everybody wants to call him QB1, but even with that, he still doesn't move the needle the same way that Roman Reigns does, and certainly not the way that John Cena did. And so his whole thing was all about finishing the story and all kinds of stuff like that. And and the thing is, of course, I know he wants to emulate Dusty, right? And of course you could say in more ways than one, there are quite a few parallels. Dusty himself was a booker, and he find a way put himself in situations and stuff like that. Even though Cody's not necessarily a booker, but he still has enough power to to wield that. And so I wouldn't be surprised if that was a Cody call himself, for him to win that title. But and the thing is, there are definitely parallels when it comes to Cody and Dusty, even though there's something more natural, I guess you could say, about Dusty in terms of that popularity. But the reason why I say that is because both of them have been multi-time champions, but at the same time they were still in the era of someone bigger than them, right? So as great as Dusty was, I know this is not a comfortable conversation for a lot of people, but at the end of the day, with all of Dusty's greatness, he was still in Ric Flair's shadow. What I mean by that, I don't even really have to explain it that much. But RIP to Dusty, with all due respect to him, but even with all his greatness back then, he was still in Ric Flair's shadow. And what I mean by that is, when you talk about the NWA and that era and territories and things like that, Ric Flair is the first one to come to mind. He's the one who held the title the most, had the longest title reigns, drew the most money. You know what I mean? And so many rivalries and storylines and stuff revolved around him. Whether it was the Harley Race feud, going into Starrcade '83, the feud with Dusty, the feud with Steamboat, Terry Funk, you know what I mean, and early Sting, you name it. Either way, Ric Flair was still the centerpiece for NWA and Jim Crockett Promotions, everything like that. He was, personified that traveling, world's champion, the real world's champion, all that stuff, right? You know what I mean? So at the end of the day, NWA, slash WCW, centered around Flair. Flair was the needle mover at that time. So that's just, that if anything, if anything, that's really what it is. And so I apply that to now, where you see Cody, and no matter what he does, he is still in the shadow of Roman Reigns. Plain and simple, and whenever Cody or Dusty have been champions, it kind of feels like a silver medal, because because they weren't the main focus, like they weren't really the ones that their respective companies built around. So with Roman, I mean, his career speaks for itself. A guy who's had the longest title reign in modern, history, right? One of the top 5 title reigns of all time. I'm talking about, especially when it comes to top 5 single title reigns of all time. He's what, 4th, he's 4th all time in longest single title reigns in WWE history. 1,316 days. One of the most recognizable numbers in the history of WWE. This guy who saved WWE during the COVID pandemic era, and brought them to heights that I believe I've said this before on the show. He brought them to heights that they hadn't seen in a long time. And John Cena talks about he was on O'Shea's Jr.'s podcast, O'Shea Jackson Jr.'s podcast, and one of the points he's talking about data points. You know what I mean? Like, data points that determine, determine the course of business, basically, right? And not only that, but and of course he also brought it up on Roman's A&E documentary, like in terms of the numbers and merch sales, ratings, PLE, buy rates, you name it, right? And the thing is, Cena was basically saying, when you look at those data points, they all point to Roman Reigns, and Cena even considered Roman to be the greatest. Not a lot of people would say that, but John Cena's opinion does carry weight. Something that does need to be respected. So what I mean, so he's definitely, Roman was definitely the rightful the rightful heir to Cena, especially when it comes, particularly when it comes to the men's division, right? And so and the thing is, of course, Roman has been the face of the company, really for the past decade, like if you include his run as the big dog and all that type of stuff. So even though it took a while for him to grow in the fans, when he finally took control of his narrative, that's what really made his trajectory skyrocket. So, you know, he's had that reign. He's had the reigns, excuse the expression, for quite some time. It's just that, by the time you get to, year 6 or year 7, whatever, what I mean, like excuse me, actually, yeah, like or rather, more so since 2014 for real. So yeah, he's at least a decade, plus on his own. And so of course, it takes about another good 5 or 6 years. And so by that point, really starts to, he starts to get into his element more and taking control of his narrative, and what have you. And so this is how we get what we got, what I mean? And so it just, came off as natural. And, and the thing is, there are fans, who enjoyed it, who loved it. It was, great storytelling. The business numbers speak for themselves, right? And especially with him main eventing countless WrestleManias, like and like I said, and just pretty legendary feuds and storylines, matches. If anything, under Roman's reign as a tribal chief, WWE has produced, some all time WrestleMania match, WrestleMania, cards. What I mean, like some all time great, like some all time great WrestleManias, and with him being front and center for it, and so yeah, like I said, of course I'm gonna get to get to the Roman thing in a minute, and I'm gonna sound like I'm going off on a tirade, but I say all that to say that at the end of the day, um, with all that being said, Cody called himself QB number 1, but the real franchise player is actually Roman Reigns. Regardless of his schedule, he's still, like at least until it's all said and done, he's still the franchise player. From tribal chief to OTC, it's still still revolves more so around Roman. And so that's why I say that, like I said, I don't want to lose my train of thought or nothing, but that's why I say that, that there's that there are parallels between, Dusty and Cody in the sense of, at the end of the day, no matter, what they try to do, they're still, their careers are not going to be in the same scope, as their respective dance partner. I think that's a big reason why, Roman and Punk, are gonna main event night 2 of WrestleMania. And there's not a lot, to really write home about, about SmackDown, and also, you know, uh, Jade and Rhea, had their standoff or promos or whatever, and it didn't quite carry the same energy, as it did online. I think the war online, had more firepower than what was produced on screen. So I think I think they kind of curtailed it, kind of tamed it a little bit, to be honest. Um, but it's like at the end of the day, I want to see Jade take it, but because Rhea's so much of a moneymaker herself, we may see something totally different. And also, also the thing is, this was a plan B because of the fact that the EST, out with that finger injury. Even though Jade versus Charlotte was right there, they've had so many stare offs and stare downs and things like that. Why not put it in Vegas? But what do I know, right? And so on Monday, of course, the main thing is how things got heated up. Between CM Punk and the Bloodline, rather, with the Usos, who were standing in Roman's place, and CM Punk is a Hall of Fame gaslighter. He talks about how Roman should have apologized to them, and all type of stuff, and throwing all the blame on Roman, and just constantly invoking his name, and just stuff like that. And and the thing is, last time I checked, last time I checked, of course, eventually, Roman and the Usos did reconcile. Last year, Roman and Jade teamed up at SummerSlam. You know what I mean? So it's not like it was that much super bad blood, right? Um, Even after the bloodline breakup and fallout and stuff like that. Excuse me. Um, because at the end of the day, they still managed to team up, and still managed to team up and defeat. You know what I mean? Like like they still managed to get together and defeat the Timu bloodline in War Games. So it's not like that much bad blood was lingering like that. Even though Roman didn't give Punk was expecting Roman to give a formal apology, quote unquote. And the thing about it was that CM Punk was doing everything in his power to get the fans to boo Roman. Uh, and the thing is, he was trying to use some of the same tactics from the podcast, but he's realizing more and more that the fans are not buying it. It's like no matter what he's starting to I think he's starting to realize more and more, that his plan to get the fans to turn on Roman, it ain't working. It ain't working. And you could tell the annoyance on his face because it's backfiring on him. And so I think that's the reason why he continues to go low the way he does. And of course, so he brought up how, brought up to the Usos, how Roman never apologized to them, and he started to get even more personal about how he was trained by Sika, and he used to tell all these different stories and all this all this different history to the Usos as if they didn't know, or something like something crazy like that, right? And so it's funny how Punk has all this admiration for Sika, and whatever at one point, but brings up his name in a pretty disparaging way. And so it's funny how Punk calls himself the voice of the voiceless, but he punches down on people who can't speak for themselves. Sika is no longer with us. And Punk's supposed to be the voice for the voiceless, but he's speaking, throwing shade at someone who doesn't have a voice anymore. So at this point, it's definitely got more personal. It's one thing, for Roman to have accountability, but it's not Punk's business. Rather, it's not his place to to try to enforce that. And the thing about it is that it amazes me, and of course, there's someone else. Shout out to Mimi from Black Wrestling. Her and I, think so much alike when it comes to Roman. And great minds think alike. Like much. I think much of us, we have much of the same or similar thought processes. When it comes to the case for Roman, right? And the thing about it is that she brought up a great point. It's just like, imagine being trained by a legend, and this said legend has taken you into his home, let you be a babysitter. He has fed you, you know what I mean? Just provided in so many different ways, even gave you gas money, whatever, all these different things, right? To help you, rise to the top on your journey to greatness, right? let's say you're trained by said legend, right? Then when you make it to the top, you become bitter because that same legend has a son who's next in line, who's on the rise. And so now you go out of your way on a podcast to disparage the very son of the guy that trained you, the very son of the guy, you know, um, who helped you become who you are. That that you try to ruin the career of this guy's son. You know, um, and talk about how he's not qualified, or rather you didn't want him in the group, and all these things like that. And that's CM Punk right there. Punk, and I believe that there are people on the internet as well who see through this as well. CM Punk has this, I guess, savior complex, whatever the case is, like this self-righteous complex, right? Who comes across as, the man of the people, who's, who's a self-righteous everyday man, and he's, the company guy, he's here every day and looks out for other people, da 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 da, you know. But ultimately, it's at the end of the day, it's still going to be about himself. There's a lot of narcissism with Punk. And so I brought this point up too, very similar to Mimi's point also. It's that people hate Roman because they feel like it's the cool thing to do. They see Roman as the villain, even when he's justified. You know what I mean? Even when he has, somebody's on, like say, even when he has legitimate arguments, legitimate cases, but because it's Roman Reigns, and because they're so comfortable in hating him, because how much they hated him before. I guess dating back to who he was as the big dog and everything like that. So they just have it forever stamped and ingrained in their mind. To hold. There are people, I believe, who still hold Roman to that stuff. There are people who still hold Roman to his past. Like believe he couldn't wrestle, and all this, all of those stupid stuff, and call him boring and none of that, things like that. No matter what he does, people have already made a predetermined decision about him, that they're not going to like him, no matter, regardless of what he does. Even when he has career-defining heel work, to elevate him to become one of the all-time greats, they're still not satisfied. Even when he has improved on the mic, you can't even troll him anymore about that suffering succotash. He's elevated past that. From a match standpoint, he's produced some of the greatest matches of his career, greatest storytelling of his career. Become one of the company's biggest money makers, major stars, what have you, right? But because it's the cool thing to do to hate Roman, and just because there are people who just because of who he is, they just naturally, like saying, just want to hate him because they feel like that's the cool thing to do. Cool thing to do on the internet, hate on Roman no matter what, even when he's justified. And the thing is, with that being said, Punk has thrown shade not only on Roman's accomplishments, but even his existence in wrestling overall. Case in point, as he's talking on the podcast, how he revealed, Punk revealed, that he wanted his Bingo Hall BFF Chris Hero to be in the Shield. Vince looked at that and said no, and Punk felt some type of way about it. he had a tantrum, because of the fact that that Vincent Kennedy, said that was a bad idea, and basically told him about himself. Now, in terms of firing him on his wedding day, I mean, that was lowbrow. You know what I mean? But but at the same time, um, there's a part of Punk that couldn't handle the fact that Vince did not see him on the same plateau, in the same stature as the likes of a John Cena. You know, and I think that Punk, still, probably still bothers him, about the fact that that Roman was champ for so long, and if anything, that Roman's championship reign, cleared Punk's legacy off the map right there. The 1,316 days, multiple WrestleMania main events, and when Punk was in his best years, could not get into the main event. And so that goes into the bitterness and the shade, and all this other type of stuff, as I said before. People hate on Roman because they feel that feel like that's the end thing, that's the cool thing to do, and their pride gets in the way of of even wanting to agree that Roman has a point. And so, and it's so like I said, that's just a naturally popular thing to do among the IWC. What I mean? And so, like I said, you have someone like Punk, who, as usual in his promos, recycles IWC talking points about Roman. There's nothing clever, nothing original, nothing new, or whatever. And so the more he disparaged the Anawani family, especially Sika, that just had the Usos boiling, especially Jay. And you go even further, Punk starts calling them errand boys, or rather, he starts calling them young boys. I said, oh, wow, and so one minute he goes shoving the mic in Jay's chest, and then Jimmy just hits him with the fade, like, and just knocks him right down. I said, oh, yeah, he had that coming. He definitely had that coming. And so, so as far as that, Punk definitely brought that on himself. You know what I mean? And it's just something about Punk, just constantly reminding people that that he's here, he's a fighting champion, and all those things like that. It's not flying in 2026. And as a matter of fact, people look at Punk, people are looking at Punk like, excuse me, we're slowing up. People are looking at Punk like, how dare you, talk about how you're here every day, and you're the common champion and things like that, but yet, you took your ball and went home for 10 years. You ran with your tail between your legs for 10 years, but yet you want to chastise Roman's schedule. So more and more, CM Punk is really losing steam, and especially anytime Roman's not around, and especially with the way the rate, with the results that came, the ratings results that recently came out, and show that the last week with Roman being there, Raw pulled in over 3 million viewers. So goes to show that Roman is definitely the needle mover that he always says he is. Roman Reigns is everything that he believes that he is. And and the thing is, like I said, a guy like CM Punk, just cannot handle it. He just can't take it, right? And you love to see it, you know what I mean? And we also saw that that Finn Balor is out of the Judgment Day finally. Clap it up for Finn Balor. clap up for him. He's no longer shackled and chained to to the Judgment Day that's constantly bringing him down. Mediocrity. You know what I mean? But yeah, it looks like gonna be looks like it's gonna be Finn versus Dominant Mania. But but also it's funny that the CM Punk talks about somebody not showing up, as a champ and things like that. He also talked about how Roman when he was a champ didn't hardly defend the title. But come on, I've done episodes about Roman's covering Roman's title reign, and I even did it like a top 10 list of his best matches as champion. I've written articles about it. He's not only did he beat Bray Wyatt, of course like I said from the Fiend to Jey Uso, of course Edge and Daniel Bryan in a triple threat. He's beaten Edge separately. He's been beating Daniel Bryan separately. He's beaten Cesaro. He's beaten John Cena. Kevin Owens, of course. Like at least 3 times. Like I said, he's beaten Cesaro. He's been beaten KO. He's beaten Sami Zayn. He's beaten Brock Lesnar, of course. Matt Riddle, even. You name it. Pretty much you name it. Roman has faced them, and has beaten Cody at WrestleMania, of course. So so it's just like, he has a body of work as a champion. Something that CM Punk, a resume that CM Punk wishes that he had. And it's funny how like I said, get back to the Judgment Day thing. But the thing is, it's funny how how Punk has all this smoke, for somebody not being there. But but yeah, his wife is the Women's Intercontinental Champion, and she barely even shows up herself. So if you're going to throw stones, don't live in a glass house. That's the way I see it. But yeah, it's like I said, as far as the Judgment Day, like I said, of course, Finn is out, and we, like I said, we saw Stephanie go out with Liv, and like I said, it's like really not much home to write about, and of course, there's talks of Brock Lesnar, like I said, looking for a WrestleMania opponent, and it's starting to become clearer even more that we could see Obafemi versus Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania. And so it's just like this card isn't as impressive as it should be. You know what I mean? And I guess they're gonna make the most out of it, but it's not enough build for it, to really be invested in like that. But I will say this, like when it comes to Obafemi, his trajectory is absolutely through the roof. We're definitely seeing the rise of Oba, as we know it. You know what I mean? Like this guy right here is money. Vincent K. McMahon would have put that belt on him. You know what I mean? Like he's, VKM would have seen dollar signs. And I think that the company itself right now, even with this new regime, I believe they see dollar signs in him as well. That that's why he relinquished the NXT title without losing. And he definitely has, if people talk about aura, having aura, Oba definitely has it. Same thing with Trick, and especially with Trick's interactions with Randy Orton. Shout, of course, shout out to Orton for that RKO. I thought that was hilarious. But yeah, what I mean, like I said, as far as that, and I also want to bring up, WWE. Of course, I want to bring up WWE 2K26, and even though I haven't gotten it yet, but I've heard great reviews about it. As a matter of fact, on Monday, on Perfectplex, Mike, of course, myself, Mike, and of course, a special guest of ours named Curtis, and so not the other one, not that one, but it's like a guy who covers games. We're talking about WWE 2K26, and they both gave it great reviews, 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, 9 out of 10. I seen somebody was even saying, it goes back to what uh, days of like Smackdown, shut your mouth. I said, oh, now we talking. You know what I mean? Here comes the pain. To me, is the benchmark uh, for the for those games. But for it to for it to have that close of a comparison like that speaks volumes. However, they got rid of the supercharger. From what I found out, I'm like, come on now. That's if anything, that was my favorite part of the game, having the supercharger. So that way, I would have to keep going through match after match, and constantly, building up currency. Just to unlock people. Supercharger, you could just unlock everybody right there all at the same time immediately. Um, you know, so I could tell that the main talking points are my rise. Um, you know what I mean? So in terms of a lot of the gameplay has definitely advanced. I've seen the graphics phenomenal, absolutely amazing. There's certainly had some glow ups. The showcase, I look forward to that. With any, if anything, with any WWE game, like the first thing I run to is story mode. Whether it was whether it was like the other WWE games, where they had a story mode. Like anything before they did showcase, like even when it came to 30 years of WrestleMania, the thing is they treated it like an ongoing story. Just taking you through a journey of of WrestleMania 1 all the way at that point to 29. And the way they narrated it too, it was like, oh yeah, this is continuation. This continuous story. So of course like I said, when it came to that, anytime I got a game, I was going right to story mode, right? And now deal with everything else like my GM, all that stuff later. Because my thing is I always like to unlock stuff, right away as soon as I get it. You know what I mean? So the thing is also they, like I said, we have a CM Punk showcase and they have like Attitude Era mode. So it's funny how whenever CM Punk has been on the cover of the game, there's an Attitude Era tie-in, right? And this is no different. Like I said, no matter what out, I was always a big fan of showcase, especially when they relaunched 2K and did it was like 2K22 and of course with Rey Mysterio, his showcase 2K23, Cena with his showcase, everybody beating Cena 2K24, 40 years of WrestleMania, 2K25, the Bloodline showcase, and 2K26. I'm looking to see what they have in store with the CM Punk showcase. And so yeah, so as far as that, like I said, I look forward to to what 2K26 brings to the table. And as far as 2K25, that got, I want to say about 8 out of 10 or 8.5 out of 10. Roman Reigns Universal title belts. If I was given a belt grade, 2K24, shoot, gave that like 9. Pretty much 9 out of 10. Wayne Eagle Championship belts. But yeah, I think just because of the way the showcase was. But yeah, of course with 2K26, the jury's still out on that, but I'm gonna go on and give that a pretty high rating as well. I know I'm very confident in it as well. And by the way, of course, I'm also wearing a Wild Samoans shirt, and of course, RIP to both Alpha and Sika. For those who didn't people I was wearing. Like I say, in honor of the Wild Samoans, I'm wearing this shirt, in their honor. And of course, I just mentioned 2K25 and their unlockables in that game, and of course, to unlock them, you have them defeat the Dudley Boys. So I like how they did a fantasy warfare with the Wild Samoans versus the Dudley Boys, because that match would have been absolute fire. That would have been epic right there. That would, you want to talk about a hard hitting fight right there. Put the Dudley Boys and Wild Samoans right, in a match together. That'd be chemistry. That's money. But but yeah, and like I said, it's funny. My thing is funny how a Punk, says what he says about the Wild Samoans, but but yet they're top 15 tag team of all time. Punk barely even top 25 wrestler of all time. You know what I mean? But but yeah, that's really what it is. So like I say, there's not much, like I said, not much to really write home about. Of course, as it pertains to, like I said, as it pertains to weekend wrestling, um, you know, and so that's pretty much does it at this point. I don't want to, belabor this episode any longer. But yeah, of course, as far as birthdays, of course, March 8th, Leon, better known as David Ruffin from the Temptations, for his roles in the Five Heartbeats, Cool Runnings, and things like that. Of course, he turned 64 on March 8th. Chad Gable turned 40 that day. Of course, Melina turned 47. Rick Steiner turned 64. One half of the Hall of Fame tag team, the Steiner brothers, of course, Dogface Grim and Rick Steiner. Dad of Braun Breaker turned 64. March 9th, of course, the legendary Jeffrey Osborne turned 78. Of course, RIP to Notorious B.I.G. March 9th. Of course, on the same day, YG turned 36. And of course, a happy belated birthday to Krista B, one half of those wrestling girls, 36 as well. On March 9th, birthday twins. Of course, March 10th, of course, Timberland turns 54. Jasmine Guy from a Different World turns 54. 64, excuse me. I'm actually at 63. My bad. Jasmine Guy turns 63. Pam Oliver turns 64 on March 10th. Of course, Kiki Wyatt turns 44. And of course, on March 11th, March 11th, Chad Moss, Bow Wow turns 39, and Anthony Davis turns 33. And so those are the birthdays for this week. And before I go, I would like to give a word of wisdom. Is that and of course, the word of wisdom is that God has blessed you with gifts to be a blessing to other people. And so so you're ultimately you're a steward of your gifts, and God wants you to be a faithful steward of your gifts. And and so if you're going to use your gifts faithfully, if you ask yourself who you can invite to serve you in that area. So at the end of the day, God is giving you gifts, giving you blessings to be a blessing to other people. You're giving you gifts so that you can share your gifts to the world. So that's what it is. Always remember that you are victorious, because greater is He that is in you than he that is in the world. When you put God in first place, you don't have to worry about being in last place. And of course, please make sure to listen to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts. Of course, thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much for watching. And may this day be the absolute very best day of your life.